Lee Hyun stood at the center of the massive council chamber and looked around at the alien faces that stared back at him with barely hidden contempt. The Viridian Chancellor sat on his raised platform with his insect-like mandibles clicking in what Lee Hyun had learned was amusement. The crystalline delegates sparkled with inner light that pulsed faster when they were annoyed, and right now they were pulsing very fast indeed. The Aquarian representative floated in her water tank with tentacles swirling in patterns that meant displeasure in her species' body language. For 3 years, Lee Hyun had been the human ambassador to this council of alien species that ruled most of the known galaxy. For 3 years he had watched them make decisions that hurt billions of people, while they argued about trade routes and territorial boundaries. For 3 years he had tried to make them understand that their policies were causing wars and suffering across hundreds of worlds. Today would be his last day trying. The chamber held representatives from 47 different alien species, each one convinced that their way of thinking was superior to all others. The humans had been invited to join this council only because they controlled several important trade routes between the Outer Rim and the core worlds. The aliens had made it clear from the beginning that humanity was barely civilized enough to deserve a seat at their table. Lee Hyun touched the small device in his pocket that contained the recorded message from Earth. The Terran Federation Council had debated for months before making their final decision. The vote had been close, but the message was clear. Humanity was done trying to work with species that saw them as nothing more than useful barbarians. The Viridian Chancellor raised one of his 4 arms to signal for attention. His voice came through the translation device as a series of harsh clicks and buzzes. Today we discuss the human proposal to establish refugee camps in the neutral zone. This council has already decided that such camps would interfere with our territorial agreements. Lee Hyun had presented that proposal 6 months ago, after the hegemony had bombed 3 civilian colonies that belonged to the Draconian Republic. 2 million refugees needed somewhere safe to live while their worlds were rebuilt. The council had spent 6 months arguing about whether helping those refugees might upset the delicate balance of power between different alien factions. Meanwhile, those refugees were living in overcrowded ships and dying from diseases that could be easily prevented. Human medical teams had been working around the clock to keep them alive while the council debated. Human engineers had been building temporary shelters on uninhabited worlds while the council argued about jurisdiction. Human food production ships had been feeding families while the council worried about trade regulations. The human proposal is rejected, the Chancellor announced. We cannot allow precedent that might encourage future refugee situations. Lee Hyun stood up slowly. Around the chamber, the alien delegates turned their attention to him with expressions that ranged from boredom to irritation. They expected him to argue or plead or try once again to make them understand why 2 million displaced people mattered, more than their political games. Instead, Lee Hyun reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple data pad. He held it up so that every delegate could see it clearly. The device was recording everything and transmitting the signal to human colonies across the galaxy. The Terran Federation formally withdraws from the Galactic Council effective immediately, Lee Hyun said in a calm, clear voice that carried throughout the massive chamber. We thank the Council for this educational experience. We have learned much about how different species choose to govern themselves. The silence that followed was complete. Even the background hum of the life support systems seemed to pause. Lee Hyun could see the confusion on alien faces as they tried to process what they had just heard. Several delegates began speaking at once in their native languages before remembering to use their translation devices. The crystalline delegate named Shiara was the first to respond. Her crystalline body flared with bright light as she spoke. You cannot simply leave the council. There are treaties and agreements and trade contracts that must be honored. Lee Hyun smiled politely. All human obligations under council law will be fulfilled according to the exact letter of those agreements. We are not breaking any treaties. We are simply choosing not to renew our membership when it expires at the end of this standard month. Thorpoi. Viridian Chancellor's mandibles clicked rapidly. This is unacceptable. Humans control too many strategic locations to simply walk away from their responsibilities. "We are not walking away from our responsibilities," Lee Hyun replied. "We are walking away from this council. There is a significant difference." The Aquarian delegate Veluma swirled her tentacles in agitation. "What about the trade routes? What about the patrol schedules? What about the medical supply agreements?" Lee Hyun looked around the chamber one final time. These aliens had spent 3 years treating humanity like an annoying child that needed constant supervision. They had blocked human proposals to help suffering populations because those proposals might upset their careful political balance. They had criticized human military tactics as too aggressive while depending on human ships to patrol the dangerous outer rim sectors. They had dismissed human technology as primitive while using human-designed systems to keep their own worlds running. "Those are excellent questions," Lee Hyun said. "I suggest you discuss them among yourselves." He turned and walked toward the exit while 47 different alien voices erupted behind him in a chaos of protests and demands. Lee Hyun did not look back. In the corridor outside the chamber, his aide Park Jin was waiting with their security team and the human diplomatic staff. "How did they take it?" Park Jin asked as they walked toward the docking bay where their ship was waiting. "About as well as we expected," Lee Hyun replied. "They still think this is some kind of negotiating tactic. The human diplomatic compound had been their home for 3 years, but Lee Hyun felt no sadness as they gathered their personal belongings and prepared to leave. The compound would remain empty. No other human would ever again sit in that council chamber and listen to aliens debate whether helping refugees was worth the political inconvenience. Their ship was a sleek diplomatic vessel called the Soul that had been designed specifically for council missions. As they lifted off from the station, Lee Hyun looked down at the massive structure that housed the galactic government. From space, it looked impressive with its gleaming towers and docking bays that could accommodate ships from dozens of different species. But Lee Hyun knew that inside those towers, the aliens were probably still arguing about territorial boundaries, while people died in refugee camps. They were probably still debating trade regulations while pirates attacked merchant ships in the outer rim. They were probably still worried about maintaining the balance of power, while entire worlds suffered under corrupt local governments. The journey back to human space would take several weeks. During that time, every human colony and outpost and military base would receive the same message that Lee Hyun had just delivered to the council. The great human withdrawal was beginning. Captain Kim Tae was commanding a patrol ship near the hegemony border when he received the coded transmission from Earth. He read the message twice to make sure he understood it correctly. Then he called his crew together in the ship's main briefing room. "We have new orders," he announced. "All human ships are to withdraw from council space immediately. We are going home." His tactical officer raised her hand. "What about the patrol schedule? The hegemony has been making threats about the draconian colonies again." "Not our problem anymore," Kim Tae replied. "Plot a course for the nearest human colony." Across the galaxy, similar scenes were playing out on hundreds of human ships. Military vessels abandoned their patrol routes and headed for human space. Diplomatic teams packed their belongings and left alien worlds. Trade ships completed their current contracts and then disappeared into hyperspace without signing new ones. The aliens had gotten exactly what they claimed to want: a galaxy without human interference. Soon they would discover what that actually meant. 3 months had passed since the humans left, and Counselor Ventar was beginning to think that maybe their departure had not been the blessing everyone had expected. He sat in his private office reviewing the latest security reports from across the galaxy, and the numbers made his scaled hide crawl with unease. Pirate attacks had increased by 300% in the outer rim sectors. Trade ships were being captured or destroyed at a rate that was crippling commerce between the core worlds and the frontier colonies. The carefully maintained peace between the hegemony and the Draconian Republic was starting to crack, as both sides accused each other of supporting the pirates. The Viridian Chancellor had called an emergency session of the military committee to address what he was calling a temporary increase in criminal activity. Ventar knew it was much more serious than that. The humans had been patrolling those sectors for years, and their mere presence had been enough to keep the pirates contained to the lawless regions beyond the galactic rim. Commander Kisseth of the Draconian Fleet stood before the committee with His reptilian features twisted into what passed for embarrassment among his species. We have 47 patrol ships covering the routes that humans previously monitored with 18 vessels. Our ships are faster and better armed, but we cannot be everywhere at once. The crystalline delegate Zareth pulsed with frustrated light. Perhaps if the Draconian fleet was more efficient in their patrol patterns, they would not need so many ships to cover the same territory. Kiseth hissed softly. The humans did not simply patrol those routes. They had established a network of informants and early warning systems that allowed them to respond to threats before they became serious problems. They had built relationships with local populations who would report suspicious activity. Most importantly, they had a reputation for never backing down from a fight, which made most pirates think twice before operating in those sectors. Ventar looked at the tactical display that showed the current positions of all Council military forces. Red markers indicated known pirate activity, and there were far too many of them. What troubled him most was that the pirates seemed to know exactly which routes were no longer protected. They were hitting targets with precision that suggested inside knowledge of Council patrol schedules. How are they getting such accurate intelligence about our fleet movements? Ventar asked. Unknown, Kiseth replied, but we suspect that some of the information networks the humans built are now being used against us. Many of the local contacts who used to report to human patrol commanders have stopped communicating with Council forces entirely. The truth was even worse than what Kiseth was willing to admit in an official briefing. The humans had not just patrolled the outer rim sectors. They had essentially created a parallel security structure that operated independently of the Council's official, military hierarchy. Local governors and station commanders had trusted human officers in ways they had never trusted Council officials. Dr. Cho Min had been working at a medical research station in the Aquarian sector when the humans withdrew. She was one of only 12 human doctors who had chosen to remain in Council space to continue their research into alien diseases. Now she was discovering just how much the Council's medical infrastructure had depended on human knowledge and expertise. The synthetic antibiotics that human chemists had developed were running out, and none of the alien species had bothered to learn how to manufacture them. They had simply assumed that humans would always be available to provide medical supplies and expertise. The Aquarian population was particularly vulnerable because their immune systems had evolved in isolation, and they had no natural resistance to many common diseases. We need the complete manufacturing specifications for Compound Zeta-7, Dr. Valuma told Cho Min during their weekly medical conference. Our population centers are experiencing outbreaks of respiratory infections that were previously controlled by human medications. Cho Min pulled up the relevant files on her computer system. I can provide the basic chemical formula, but the manufacturing process requires equipment and techniques that were developed specifically for human industrial facilities. The compound is unstable at temperatures above 40 degrees and breaks down rapidly in the presence of certain metallic elements that are common in Aquarian manufacturing systems. The Aquarian doctor's tentacles swirled in patterns that indicated distress. Can you modify the formula to work with our existing equipment? Possibly, Cho Min replied, but it would require months of testing and research to ensure that the modified compound is both safe and effective for your species. In the meantime, people are going to get sick, and some of them are going to die. Similar conversations were happening across the galaxy, as alien medical personnel discovered that human doctors had been quietly solving problems that no one else had even recognized as problems. Human medical researchers had spent decades studying the complex interactions between different alien biochemistries and had developed treatments that worked across multiple species. The Council's centralized medical system had looked efficient on paper, but in practice it had been supplemented by a network of human specialists who understood how to adapt treatments for different alien populations. Without those specialists, the system was beginning to fail in ways that would not be obvious until people started dying. Captain Bak. So was commanding a human research vessel called the Sejong when she received reports about infrastructure failures in the Crystalline Dominion. The proud crystalline beings had always insisted that their technology was superior to anything humans could develop, but they had quietly adopted human-designed power distribution systems for their cities. Their main power grid is failing, her science officer reported. The crystalline power cores are working perfectly, but the distribution network cannot handle the load fluctuations during peak usage periods. Baekso studied the technical reports that were coming through unofficial channels. What exactly is failing? The load balancing algorithms, her engineer replied. The system was designed to automatically distribute power based on real-time demand analysis. But the software was written by human programmers who understood how organic populations use energy throughout their daily cycles. The crystalline beings have completely different usage patterns and the system cannot adapt. The crystalline dominion had dismissed human software as primitive and inefficient, but they had never bothered to develop their own replacement systems. They had simply assumed that their superior technology would eventually make human contributions irrelevant. Now their cities were experiencing rolling blackouts during peak hours, and their industrial facilities were shutting down when the power grid could not meet demand. President Yoon Hai was reviewing reports from human colonies throughout the galaxy when her communications officer announced that another formal request for diplomatic contact had arrived from the Council. It was the 5th such request this month, and like all the others, it would be filed away without a response. What do they want this time? Yoon Hai asked. Same as always, her aide replied. They want to discuss the possibility of renewed cooperation in areas of mutual interest. They are particularly interested in re-establishing patrol agreements for the Outer Rim sectors. Yoon Hai looked at the latest intelligence reports from Council space. The galactic economy was starting to contract as trade routes became too dangerous for civilian shipping. Several member species were beginning to withdraw their ships from the most vulnerable sectors, which only made the pirate problem worse. Send the standard response, she ordered. The Terran Federation is currently focused on internal development and is not available for external commitments. The truth was that humanity was thriving without the Council. Human colonies had always been more self-sufficient than alien worlds because humans had learned early in their galactic expansion that they could not depend on others for essential services. Human trading networks were actually expanding as alien merchants sought safer alternatives to the increasingly dangerous Council trade routes. But the most important change was psychological. For the first time in decades, humans were building something for themselves instead of trying to fix problems created by alien politics. Human engineers were developing new technologies instead of adapting existing ones to work with incompatible alien systems. Human researchers were exploring questions that interested them instead of solving crises that alien governments had created through poor planning. The Council had wanted to govern the galaxy without human interference, and they were getting exactly what they had asked for. The problem was that they had never understood how much they had been depending on that interference to keep their civilization functioning. Officer Nam Su was monitoring Council communications from a human listening post when he detected the first signs that some alien species were beginning to panic. Emergency Council sessions were being called almost daily, as reports of system failures and security breaches accumulated. They still think this is temporary, Nam Su reported to his commanding officer. They keep talking about negotiating a return to the previous arrangements. His commander looked at the intercepts with grim satisfaction. How long before they realize that we are not coming back? 6 months after the human departure, the Galactic Council was facing its worst crisis in over 2 centuries. Admiral Glubeth of the Aquarian Collective stood before the emergency assembly with her tentacles arranged in formal patterns of desperate appeal. Her water-filled chamber showed signs of stress corrosion that indicated she had not been maintaining proper chemical balance, a sure sign of extreme anxiety among her species. Honorable delegates, she began, her voice carrying the harmonic undertones that indicated profound distress. The Aquarian Collective formally requests immediate military assistance to protect our trade routes. In the past week alone, we have lost 17 merchant vessels and 2 passenger ships to pirate attacks. The Viridian Chancellor's mandibles clicked in what might have been sympathy or irritation. The Council fleet is already stretched beyond its operational limits. We cannot provide additional protection for every member species that requests it. Admiral Glubeth's tentacles coiled tightly around the support rails of her chamber. With respect, Honorable Chancellor, the humans maintained effective protection for our shipping lanes with a single patrol vessel per sector. Surely the combined Council fleet can match that level of coverage. Counselor Zethra of the Hegemony leaned forward on his crystalline perch. The humans had advantages that we do not possess. They had established intelligence networks that took decades to build. They had developed relationships with local populations that provided early warning of pirate activity. Most importantly, they had a reputation for aggressive response that deterred attacks before they happened. What Zethra did not mention was that human patrol ships had rarely needed to actually fight the pirates. The mere knowledge that humans were patrolling a sector was usually enough to make criminal organizations look for easier targets elsewhere. Human military doctrine was based on the principle that the best battle is the one you never have to fight, and they had perfected the art of deterrence through demonstrated competence. The Council fleet was larger and more heavily armed than the human patrol squadrons had ever been, but they were not getting the same results. Alien military commanders were discovering that patrolling space lanes required more than just flying ships along predetermined routes. It required understanding local politics, building relationships with civilian populations, and projecting an image of inevitable consequences for criminal activity. Engineer Bayek. So was analyzing intelligence reports from Council space when she noticed a pattern that would have been obvious to any human military strategist. The pirates were not just random criminals looking for easy targets. They were organized groups that seemed to have detailed knowledge of Council fleet movements and response protocols. "Someone is feeding information to the pirates," she reported, to her commanding officer aboard the research vessel Sejong. "They know exactly when patrol ships will be in each sector, and they time their attacks to avoid Council forces." Her commander studied the tactical analysis with interest. "Any idea who might be providing that information?" "Several possibilities," Bexo replied. "But the most likely source is Council military personnel who are frustrated with their current assignments. Human patrol officers had good relationships with local populations because they were effective at their jobs. Council officers are failing to prevent attacks, and the local populations blame them for the failures. The breakdown of trust between Council forces and civilian populations was creating a feedback loop that made the security situation progressively worse. Local governments stopped sharing intelligence with Council patrols because they did not believe the patrols could act on that intelligence effectively. Without local intelligence, the Council forces could not prevent attacks, which made local populations even less likely to cooperate with them. Dr. Ryuda was working at a human medical facility in neutral space when she received a desperate communication from her former colleague Dr. Shi-Lin of the Crystalline Dominion. The crystalline being's body was flickering with unstable light patterns that indicated severe medical distress. "Dr. Ryuda, we need your immediate assistance," Shi-Lin transmitted. "We are experiencing a cascade failure in our medical systems, and our population is beginning to suffer from conditions that were previously controlled by human-developed treatments." Ryuda looked at the medical data that Shi-Lin had transmitted along with her request. The Crystalline Dominion was dealing with multiple simultaneous health crises that should have been easily manageable with proper medical protocols. The problem was that their medical system had been designed to work in conjunction with human support services that no longer existed. "Your primary issue is not the diseases themselves," Ryuda explained. "Your medical infrastructure was built to depend on human diagnostic equipment and treatment protocols. When you remove the human components, the entire system becomes unstable." The crystalline beings had always prided themselves on their advanced medical technology, but that technology had been developed for treating crystalline physiology exclusively. When they joined the galactic community, they had been forced to deal with dozens of alien species with completely different biological systems. Human medical researchers had developed the interfaces and protocols that allowed crystalline technology to work with non-crystalline patients. "Can you provide us with the specifications for rebuilding those interfaces?" Shi-Lin asked. "I can provide you with the basic technical requirements," Ryuda replied. "But implementing them would require months of testing and development work. You would need human medical researchers to oversee the project and human engineers to adapt your equipment. Even then, you would be rebuilding systems that already exist and work perfectly well in human space." The implication was clear. The Crystalline Dominion could spend years and enormous resources trying to replicate human medical capabilities, or they could swallow their pride and ask for help from the species they had dismissed as primitive. So far, pride was winning, but people were starting to die while their leaders debated. Commander O-Jin was monitoring communications intercepts from his position aboard the patrol vessel Incheon when he detected signs that the Council was beginning to fracture along species lines. Emergency meetings were being called almost daily, as different alien governments blamed each other for the deteriorating situation. The hegemony is accusing the Draconian Republic of supporting pirate activity in Aquarian space, O-Jin reported to Fleet Command. The Draconians are claiming that hegemony forces are deliberately avoiding patrol duties in contested sectors. The breakdown in cooperation between Council member species was exactly what human strategic analysts had predicted. The Council had always been an uneasy alliance of species that had fundamental disagreements about how the galaxy should be governed. Human diplomats had spent decades mediating disputes and finding compromises that allowed the different species to work together despite their differences. Without human mediation, those old conflicts were resurging. The hegemony wanted to expand their territorial boundaries, while the Draconian Republic insisted on maintaining the existing borders. The Aquarian Collective wanted increased military protection for their trade routes, while the Crystalline Dominion wanted to reduce military spending and focus on technological development. President Yoon Hai was reviewing the daily intelligence reports when her communications officer announced that they had received a formal diplomatic message from the Viridian Chancellor himself. It was the highest-level contact attempt the Council had made since the human withdrawal. "What does he want?" Yoon Hai asked. "He is requesting a private meeting to discuss what he calls matters of mutual concern," her aide replied. "He specifically mentions the deteriorating security situation in the Outer Rim and suggests that renewed cooperation might benefit both humanity and the Council." Yoon Hai considered the request carefully. The Viridian Chancellor had been one of the most vocal critics of human membership in the Council. He had consistently argued that humans were too aggressive and unpredictable to be trusted with important responsibilities. Now he was asking for help dealing with problems that human forces had been preventing for years. "Send our standard response," she ordered. "The Terran Federation appreciates the Chancellor's interest, but we are currently focused on internal development projects." The truth was that humanity had no interest in returning to their previous relationship with the Council. Human colonies were prospering without the constant drain of resources that had gone to solving alien problems. Human researchers were making breakthrough discoveries instead of spending their time adapting existing technologies to work with incompatible alien systems. Most importantly, humans were building something that belonged to them. For decades, they had been junior partners in a galactic civilization that never quite accepted them as equals. Now they were creating their own civilization based on human values and human priorities. Captain Kim Tae was commanding a survey mission to explore potential colony sites when he received a priority message from Earth. The Terran Federation had decided to begin the next phase of their expansion plan, which involved establishing new colonies in previously unexplored sectors of space. "We are no longer limited by Council territorial restrictions." 1 year after the human departure, the Galactic Council chamber felt like a tomb. Half the seats that had once been occupied by proud alien delegates now sat empty as species after species withdrew from the galactic government to focus on their own survival. The Viridian Chancellor looked out over the sparse attendance with mandibles that clicked in barely controlled desperation. The economic reports spread across his desk painted a picture of systematic collapse that even the most pessimistic projections had not anticipated. Interstellar commerce had fallen to levels not seen since before the Council was formed. 3 entire sectors had been abandoned by civilian shipping as pirate activity made trade routes too dangerous to use. The carefully constructed networks of cooperation and mutual support that had held the galaxy together for centuries were unraveling faster than anyone had thought possible. "Honorable delegates," the Chancellor began, his voice carrying harmonics of distress that his translation software could not quite disguise. "We must face the reality that our current situation is not sustainable. We need to take decisive action to restore stability to our territories." Councillor Ithara of the Energy Collective flickered with patterns of agitation. Her species existed as pure energy contained within crystalline matrices, and she communicated through complex light displays that were beautiful to watch but difficult to interpret. Today, her patterns were chaotic and urgent. The question before us is simple, she said, her words formed by manipulating electromagnetic fields. Do we continue pretending that we can manage galactic governance without human assistance? Or do we admit that we made a catastrophic error when we allowed them to leave? The silence that followed was thick with the weight of wounded pride. Every species in the chamber had spent decades asserting their superiority over the primitive humans who had somehow stumbled into galactic civilization through sheer luck and stubbornness. Admitting that they actually needed human help would require acknowledging that their fundamental assumptions about galactic politics had been wrong. Admiral Kisseth stood to deliver the latest military briefing, and his reptilian features showed the strain of months of unsuccessful campaigns against increasingly bold pirate organizations. The security situation continues to deteriorate across all monitored sectors. We have lost 12 patrol vessels in the past month alone, and pirate fleets are now operating with impunity in regions that were previously considered completely secure. The pirates had evolved from opportunistic raiders into organized military forces that seemed to have better intelligence and more effective tactics than the Council fleet itself. They struck with precision timing that suggested inside knowledge of Council patrol schedules, and they vanished into hyperspace before response forces could arrive. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to be coordinating their activities across multiple sectors in ways that suggested central command and control. How is this possible? Demanded Councillor Vexitar of the Draconian Republic. Our combined fleet is larger and better equipped than anything the humans ever deployed. We should be able to maintain security with our superior technology and numbers. Kisseth's tail lashed with frustrated energy. Superior technology means nothing if it is not used effectively. The humans understood that space patrol requires more than simply flying ships along predetermined routes. They built relationships with local populations who provided intelligence about suspicious activity. They established rapid response protocols that allowed them to coordinate between multiple sectors. Most importantly, they developed a reputation for inevitable retaliation that made criminal organizations think twice before operating in human-protected space. What Kisseth could not say in an official briefing was that the Council fleet was failing because alien military doctrine was fundamentally incompatible with effective space patrol operations. Council forces were designed to fight large-scale battles between organized fleets, not to hunt down small groups of criminals who used hit-and-run tactics in civilian sectors. Human patrol vessels had been smaller and less heavily armed than Council warships, but they had been designed specifically for patrol operations. They could operate independently for months without resupply. They could interface with civilian communication networks to gather intelligence, and they carried specialized equipment for tracking ships through hyperspace jumps. Dr. Cho Min was working at a refugee medical center in neutral space when she received an urgent request for assistance from the Aquarian Medical Authority. The message was marked with priority codes that indicated a species-wide medical emergency, something that had not happened in the Aquarian Collective for over 3 centuries. Dr. Cho Min, we need immediate consultation on a cascading medical crisis that is affecting our entire population, the message began. Our medical infrastructure is experiencing systematic failures that we cannot resolve with existing resources. The attached medical data told a story of preventable disasters that were becoming widespread because the Aquarian medical system had been designed to depend on human support services. Diseases that had been eradicated for generations were returning because the synthetic antibiotics that controlled them were no longer being manufactured. Medical equipment was failing because the diagnostic software had been written by human programmers who understood how to interface alien biology with crystalline technology. Your primary problem is not medical, Cho Min replied. Your problem is logistical. Your entire medical infrastructure was integrated with human systems in ways that your medical personnel never fully understood. When you remove the human components, the whole system becomes unstable. The Aquarian response came within hours, marked with even higher priority codes. We are prepared to offer unprecedented compensation for human medical assistance. Our population is beginning to suffer casualties that could have been prevented with proper medical support. Cho Min forwarded the message to Terran Federation, Medical Command, and received a response that was both predictable and final. All human medical personnel are currently assigned to colony development projects. We are not available for external medical emergencies. The truth was harsher than the official response suggested. Humanity had medical capabilities that could solve the Aquarian crisis in a matter of weeks. But they had no intention of returning to their previous role as the galaxy's unpaid emergency response service. The aliens had made it clear that they considered human medical knowledge to be primitive and inadequate. Now they could live with the consequences of that assessment. Engineer Bayek So was analyzing infrastructure reports from across Council space when she identified a pattern that explained why alien civilizations were experiencing such widespread system failures. The problem was not that alien technology was inferior to human technology. The problem was that galactic civilization had become an integrated system where human-designed components were essential for making everything else work together. Look at this power grid analysis from the Crystalline Dominion, she told her research team aboard the vessel Sejong. Their power generation technology is actually superior to anything we ever developed. But their distribution network depends on load-balancing algorithms that were written by human programmers who understood how organic populations use energy throughout their daily cycles. The crystalline beings had dismissed human software as primitive, but they had never bothered to develop replacement systems that could handle the complex energy usage patterns of a multi-species galactic civilization. They had simply assumed that their superior technology would eventually make human contributions irrelevant. Same pattern everywhere we look, her chief engineer observed. Alien species developed amazing specialized technologies, but humans developed the interfaces and protocols that made all those different technologies work together. Remove the human components and the whole system falls apart. It was like removing the nervous system from a living organism. Each individual organ might be healthy and functional, but without the connective tissue that allowed them to work together, the entire body would die. President Yoon Hai was reviewing the latest intelligence reports when her communications officer announced that they had received an unprecedented formal communication from the Galactic Council. The message bore the seals of all remaining member species and was addressed directly to the Terran Federation government. They want to negotiate our return to the Council, her aide reported. They are offering full membership with voting rights equal to any founding species. They are also offering to pay compensation for what they are calling the temporary disruption of human commercial activities. Yoon Hai read through the formal proposal with growing amazement. The aliens were offering everything that human diplomats had been requesting for decades: full equality in council governance, unrestricted access to all galactic territories, and recognition of human territorial claims that had been disputed for years. What is our response? Her aide asked. File it with all the other requests, Yoon Hai replied. We are not interested in returning to our previous relationship with the Council. The offer was too little and too late. Humanity had discovered that they were better off without the constant drain of alien problems and alien politics. 2 years after humanity's quiet departure, the Galactic Council chamber had become a monument to failed ambition. The Viridian Chancellor stood alone at the center of the vast space where 47 different species had once gathered to govern the galaxy. Now only 16 delegates remained, and most of them attended the sessions remotely, rather than risk the dangerous journey to the Council station. The Chancellor's mandibles clicked in patterns that his own species would recognize as profound grief, but the translation systems could only render his words in cold diplomatic language. Honored delegates, we must acknowledge that our current governmental structure is no longer viable. The Council lacks the resources and capabilities necessary to maintain galactic stability. Through the chamber's massive viewing ports, he could see the evidence of the galaxy's decline. The space around the Council station that had once been filled with ships from dozens of different species now hosted only a few heavily armed vessels that belonged to the surviving member governments. The magnificent trade hub that had once connected the core worlds to the frontier territories was now a ghost port where empty docking bays stood as monuments to collapsed commerce. The economic data was even worse than the visual evidence suggested. Interstellar trade had contracted to levels not seen since before the formation of galactic civilization. Entire sectors had reverted to subsistence economies as the complex supply chains that connected different worlds broke down without human maintenance. 3 species had gone extinct in the past year, not from war or disease, but from the simple inability to maintain the technological systems that their populations required for survival. Admiral Kisseth delivered his final military briefing with the weary resignation of a soldier who had fought a war that could not be won. Pirate organizations now control approximately 60% of previously secure space lanes. They have evolved from criminal gangs into de facto governments that collect taxes from merchant vessels and provide protection services to worlds that can afford to pay them. The irony was bitter and complete. The galaxy had rejected human protection because it was too expensive and too intrusive, only to find themselves paying tribute to criminal organizations that provided the same services at much higher cost, and with no regard for civilian casualties. "What about our remaining fleet assets?" asked Counselor Ithara, her energy matrix flickering with patterns that indicated resignation rather than hope. "We have 12 operational patrol vessels covering territory that once required over 300 ships to secure," Kisseth replied. "Our forces are effective in direct combat, but we lack the intelligence networks and rapid response capabilities that made human patrols successful. We can win battles, but we cannot prevent the wars that make those battles necessary." The Admiral did not mention that several of his own officers had approached him privately about the possibility of negotiating separate peace agreements with the larger pirate organizations. The Council fleet was outnumbered and outmaneuvered by enemies who understood galactic politics better than the government that was supposed to be fighting them. Dr. Cho Min was treating refugees at a medical station in what had once been Aquarian space when she received word that the Aquarian Collective had formally dissolved as a governmental entity. The proud species that had once commanded vast ocean worlds and sophisticated biotechnology had been reduced to scattered survivors fleeing their own territories in overcrowded transport ships. "What happened to them?" asked her medical assistant, a young human doctor who had never known the galaxy before the Great Withdrawal. "They forgot how to maintain their own civilization," Cho Min replied, as she worked to treat Aquarian refugees suffering from diseases that should have been eradicated centuries ago. Their medical technology was designed for their species alone, but they lived in a galaxy with dozens of different alien populations. Human researchers developed the interfaces that allowed their technology to work with non-Aquarian patients. When the humans left, their medical system could no longer function in a multi-species environment. The refugee camps were filled with similar stories. The crystalline Dominion had suffered cascading power grid failures that left their cities dark, and their industrial base crippled. The hegemony had fragmented into dozens of competing factions as their central government lost the ability to coordinate between different star systems. The Draconian Republic had become a military dictatorship that could maintain order within its core territories, but had abandoned its frontier colonies to fend for themselves. Commander Ojin was monitoring Council communications from his position aboard the stealth vessel Busan when he detected the transmission that confirmed what human intelligence analysts had been predicting for months. The Galactic Council was preparing to make a final desperate offer to humanity. "They are broadcasting on all frequencies," Ojin reported to Fleet Command. "The Chancellor is making a public appeal for human assistance." The transmission was indeed being sent on every communication channel that reached human space. The Viridian Chancellor appeared on screens throughout human territory with a message that would have been unthinkable just 2 years earlier. "Citizens of the Terran Federation," the Chancellor began, his words carefully chosen to acknowledge human sovereignty in a way that the Council had never done before. "The Galactic Council formally requests that humanity return to galactic governance as senior partners with full authority to implement whatever policies you deem necessary for galactic stability." The offer was unprecedented. The aliens were not just asking for human help. They were offering to surrender effective control of galactic government to the species they had once dismissed as primitive barbarians. They were acknowledging that human judgment was superior to their own, and that human methods were more effective than anything they could devise. President Yun Hai watched the Chancellor's message from her office aboard the colony ship New Sol, which was currently orbiting a pristine world that would soon become humanity's newest colony. Through her window, she could see the construction ships that were preparing the surface for the first wave of human settlers. "What is our response?" her aide asked. "No response," Yun-hai replied. "Let them wait." The truth was that humanity no longer needed the Council or the galactic civilization that the Council represented. Human colonies were expanding rapidly into territories that had been forbidden under Council law. Human trade networks were growing stronger as alien merchants sought the safety and reliability that only human-protected space could provide. Human technology was advancing faster than ever before because human researchers no longer had to waste time adapting their discoveries to work with incompatible alien systems. Most importantly, human civilization was unified and confident in ways that it had never been during the Council years. For the first time in their galactic history, humans were building something that belonged entirely to them, free from the compromises and restrictions that had limited their potential for so long. Captain Kim Tae was leading a survey expedition to map potential colony sites in the Outer Rim when his science officer detected artificial structures on a world that Council records showed as uninhabited. The structures turned out to be abandoned alien settlements that had been thriving communities just 2 years earlier. "What happened here?" his science officer asked as they studied the empty cities and silent industrial facilities. "They lost the ability to maintain their civilization," Kim Tae replied. "Look at the infrastructure. Everything was designed to depend on external support systems that no longer exist. When the support networks collapsed, the settlements became unviable. It was happening throughout the galaxy. Alien civilizations that had seemed stable and self-sufficient were discovering that they had actually been dependent on human-maintained systems in ways they had never understood. The humans had not conquered these worlds or destroyed these civilizations. They had simply stopped maintaining the invisible infrastructure that had made galactic civilization possible." Admiral Song Yu was reviewing the final intelligence reports from Council space when she realized that the great experiment was complete. The galaxy had gotten exactly what it had asked for when it allowed humanity to leave. They had wanted to see what galactic governance looked like without human interference, and now they knew. "What are your recommendations for our future relationship with the Council?" her intelligence chief asked. "No relationship," Song Yu replied. "We tried for decades to work within their system and they never accepted us as equals. Now they want us to return as their saviors. But we are not interested in saving civilizations that never appreciated what we were doing for them in the first place." The human response to the Council's desperate plea came not from any official government channel but from Commander Oh-jin aboard his patrol vessel. His message was broadcast on all frequencies to ensure that every surviving alien government would hear it clearly. "The Terran Federation acknowledges the Council's request for assistance," Oh-jin announced. "However, we are currently engaged in more productive endeavors. We wish the Council well in their future governance efforts." The subtext was unmistakable. Humanity was done being the galaxy's unpaid police force, maintenance crew,